Hi guys, welcome to my very first true crime video. Thank you so much for clicking. I really appreciate it. And to everyone who encouraged me to start this channel when I said I wanted to, thank you for the support. It means a lot. The case I'm going to be talking about today is pretty intense and I have a lot to share with you guys, so it's going to be a long one. I might even have to split it into two videos. I'm not really sure what I'm going to do yet. Also, if there's anything I left out or got wrong, feel free to let me know in the comments. And also just make sure to keep the comments respectful. This is not just a story, it's real people, real events, real families, and they were affected by everything that happened in real life. So yeah, it's just common sense. Thank you so much. Okay, so now I guess we can get into the video. So the case I'm going to be talking about today is the case of Bethany Deaton, and let me tell you, I had no idea what I was getting into when I started researching this case. It involves cults, IHOP, and not the IHOP you're thinking of, a different one. So many people are involved, and it was kind of a roller coaster. So let's get into it. Bethany Ann Leidline was born on October 15th in 1985 in San Antonio, Texas, to her parents, Eric and Carol. She had 4 siblings, including 3 sisters, Shannon, Erin, and Kristen, and 1 brother named Matthew. They grew up in the suburbs of Dallas in a devout Christian home, and Bethany was homeschooled until high school. Her mother described her as, quote, quiet but deeply caring, intelligent, and a very loving person.
One word I always use to describe Bethany is radiant. Her face just lit up with this inner beauty.
Now, growing up, Bethany loved reading and writing. She would imagine herself living in a cottage, working as a novelist and a professor at a small university. And one of her best friends, Taryn O'Brien, described her as a romantic at heart. She said that Bethany used to write letters to her future husband and describe in great detail what he would look like, which I can totally relate to because me and my friends would do that all the time. Not the letters, but like we would just describe what our future husbands were gonna be like.
We gradually became friends, as kindred spirits often do. We just loved poetry and art and beauty, and we would read good literature and talk about it, and she really drew those things out of me, and that was something beautiful about our friendship.
Not only was she extremely beautiful, but she was also very intelligent and a talented writer. By the time she was 13, she'd read almost every Charles Dickens novel. In 2003, she started a blog, and she even got into college on a writing scholarship at Southwestern University, which is a small liberal arts school in Georgetown, Texas, and she started there in 2005. While in college, she joined a group of like-minded Christian intellectuals, and it was in this group that she would meet her future husband, Tyler Deaton. Tyler Deaton was born and raised in Robstown, Texas, which is a suburb of Corpus Christi, in an extremely religious Presbyterian household. Now, growing up, he struggled with his sexuality because he was gay, but due to his upbringing, he learned to view it as unnatural and wrong. He also eventually came to think that being gay was a choice that he was actively making. He said, quote, "To me, being gay meant you were like this messed up, even like villainous person. You couldn't love God. I didn't identify as gay." He thought of anyone who didn't agree with him as ignorant, and even his quote in his high school yearbook was, "Be intolerant because some things are just stupid." Inside, he just kind of felt worthless, so it was up to him to make up for it in every challenge he faced and everything he did. In high school, he joined the marching band and became a champion debater, and he even ended up in his class's top 10 when he graduated. Tyler had a love and fascination for fantasy books such as Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, and the Chronicles of Narnia. Tyler was so mesmerized by these books and their fantastical, magical aspect that he claimed to use a, quote, mysterious power to control others in ways that were unexplainable. He even practiced magic in high school even though he was a devout Christian. He, like Bethany, attended Southwestern University. So this group that I mentioned earlier that Bethany joined, Tyler actually started it in his junior year of college because he claimed God commanded him to start a worship group. And his love of these fantasy books was something that also brought the group together. They all kind of had that in common. He believed that his homosexuality kind of counteracted his faith, and he told his friends, quote, "I just know that sociologically there's a connection between this power-obsessed dark magician, evil dictator thing and altered sexuality." But despite this, he was determined to overcome his struggles and act as a leader to this worship group. He led, quote, "intense prayer sessions where they'd try to heal the sick and ward off evil spirits." And according to Bose Harrington, who was another member of the group that I'm going to be mentioning a lot because after everything happened, he spoke out a lot about his experience with Tyler and the group. So I'm going to be using a lot of quotes from him and just letting you know. But according to him, Tyler believed that the more they prayed, miracles would happen and people would flock to their group. He also said that Tyler claimed he was an apostle. Now, Bethany immediately had a crush on Tyler. He was everything she wanted in a man. He was tall, handsome, a Christian, and he was also very charismatic and charming. And so she just kind of instantly developed this crush on him, and her friend Taryn said that she was over the moon for him. And as for her involvement in the group, everybody loved her. She was known to take care of people and even described as the lifeblood of the collective. She was also said to have a quiet energy that flowed through the group. The group started out just innocently meeting once a week to pray, but it quickly took off and turned into something so much more. Now, before we move on, I want to introduce you to one more member of the group who will play a key part later on in the story, and his name is Micah Moore. He was a freshman at Southwestern University, and he was described as kind of an open-minded musician, just kind of wandering around with his guitar. He was apparently weird and a little bit out there, but pleasant to be around. Earlier in the year, he had done acid and hallucinated legions of demons and angels fighting over his soul. Now, this had really affected him. It left him questioning the nature of reality and even if he was real or not. He apparently told one of his friends that only someone radical could save him. And one of his former classmates said that he was, quote, looking for magic in his life. In 2007, Bethany and Micah met in an English class and they hit it off immediately. They became friends, and to her, he seemed like just kind of a lost soul who needed some guidance. And of course, the natural thing to do was welcome him into the group. And the group became kind of a sanctuary for Micah. It was exactly what he was looking for. Micah was particularly taken with Tyler, who he described as having a special gift, which apparently was a common consensus throughout the group. So you can see that they're really starting to kind of worship Tyler. One of the ex-members said, quote, "What we saw in Tyler was a kind of vibrancy and conviction, an extreme devotion. It was hard not to think, what if he is walking with the Lord?" In December of 2007, Tyler attended a conference in Kansas City for an organization called IHOP, aka the International House of Prayer, not pancakes. And I'm going to be saying IHOP throughout this video, and just know that I mean the International House of Prayer, not pancakes. According to Wikipedia, IHOP is a charismatic evangelical Christian movement and missions organization based in Kansas City, Missouri, and the nearby suburb of Grandview that focuses on prayer and worship. It is best known for the prayer room, which has run 24/7 with live worship teams since September 19th, 1999, and is simultaneously broadcast via its website and YouTube. IHOP was founded by Mike Bickle on May 7th, 1999. He claimed that in 1983, God instructed him to establish 24-hour prayer. According to Rolling Stone, Bickle believes that unceasing euphoric worship and song at IHOP and in prayer rooms across the globe, which should never close or be empty, will promote passionate intimacy with the Lord, revive the church, and demolish demonic strongholds. And actually, my whole inspiration for this video was a video I watched on IHOP by Fundy Fridays. She makes videos about Christian fundamentalism, which I don't really know that much about, so I find very interesting to learn about on her channel. And I got inspired to do this video after watching her video on IHOP, so I highly recommend you check that out. I'll have it linked in the description. But she briefly mentioned Bethany in that video, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. And here I am. Fun fact, on October 14th, 2010, the International House of Pancakes sued the International House of Prayer for trademark dilution and infringement. However, the lawsuit was dropped when the International House of Prayer agreed to go by IHOP KC instead of IHOP, and the KC stands for Kansas City. But I'm still going to be referring to it as IHOP. At their conferences, something they tell attendees is that they are, quote, in the early days of the generation in which Jesus returns, and Mike Bickle says, I believe that people alive on the earth today will actually see the Lord with their own eyes. And after attending this conference, Tyler was ecstatic. He told the group, quote, friends, I kid you not, when I say that I feel God has transformed me more in that short period of time that I have been so far in my life, I have one word attached to one phrase that God has violently poured into my heart. It is echoing in the heavens right this instant, and I mean that literally. That word, that phrase is this: revival through prayer and worship. "Friends, I freaking cannot wait to talk to you in person." So clearly he was incredibly moved by what he had heard at the conference and excited to share it with the rest of the group. According to Bose, within a month of Tyler returning from Kansas City, everyone in the group had become a hardcore IHOPper. They would read IHOP books, listen to IHOP music, travel to conferences. It became an integral part of their group.
We were all really fascinated with the idea of getting to be in the last generation, and with IHOP's teaching that there is a special group of people that are going to prepare the rest of the world for his return. We felt like we were all called to be part of that chosen group. We felt special.
By the spring of 2008, the group had roughly 20 members, and Tyler had a tight grip on all of them. He even would dictate the relationships in the group. For example, if there was a couple that he didn't think went well together, he would tell them that they weren't the correct match, and he would try to pair them off with other members of the group, which is super creepy and weird. And if a match wasn't working out, he would actually break them up. Sometimes two members were ordered to avoid each other entirely. But Tyler himself did not date anyone because he didn't want anything to distract him from his commitment to God. Although Tyler was said to have made advances on other men in the group, even play wrestling and cuddling with them, and when he was confronted about it, he said it was just friendliness and camaraderie, and their bonding was bringing them closer to the Lord. Despite all this, Bethany still had a crush on Tyler, even though he actually flat out told her at one point that it was never going to happen. And this was kind of starting to wear on her. She had liked him for 3 years at this point with no reciprocation, and friends and family kind of noticed a turning point with her in the summer of 2008 when she started to get depressed. If you remember from earlier, Micah claimed to have seen legions of angels and demons when he was on his acid trip, and these kinds of visions continued for him throughout his time in the group. He apparently saw demons in every shadow and would sometimes even speak in tongues, claiming that God and demons were trying to speak through him. In November of 2008, Micah had a vision that something tragic was going to happen on campus on December 3rd. On December 4th, a student named Rob Atkinson was hit by a car and killed. Before I go on, I want to mention that after this winter break, Micah's parents made him transfer to the University of Texas because they were worried about his mental health. Now, what's interesting about this is not only had Tyler and the group come into contact with Rob before, they actually didn't like him. See, Rob was a philosophy major, and he did not agree with Tyler's extreme ideas and us versus them mentality. And for that reason, Tyler strongly disliked Rob, at one point calling him the harbinger of the Antichrist. And he actually saw it as a good thing that someone who had been against him and against his beliefs had passed away. Now you might think there's no way the rest of the group would agree that it was a good thing. They probably thought it was a tragedy like everybody else did. But you would be wrong. Not only did they see it as a good thing, Rob's death actually solidified their faith in Tyler as their leader. And Bose even said, quote, "We talked about Rob in a tone of gleeful triumphalism." Now to the group, Tyler seemed even more powerful, and they were ready to follow him to the ends of the earth. The ends of the earth being Kansas City. Instead of the group making use of their majors, following their own paths in life, getting their own careers, they followed Tyler to Kansas City, which, if you remember, is where IHOP is. And this, of course, included Bethany, who was one of Tyler's biggest supporters at this point. She and Tyler moved there first, and then slowly, as the rest of the group graduated, they all joined them in Kansas City. Tyler and Bethany joined a 6-month internship program at IHOP that was made for a generation who, in loving obedience, will abandon themselves to Jesus. While living in Kansas City, the group had 2 houses split by gender, so there was a men's house and a women's house. And Tyler and Bethany kind of acted as chaperones for each house. From 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. they learned about biblical analysis and theology, and from 6 p.m. to midnight they worshipped in the prayer room. Like I said, IHOP has its 24-hour prayer room that you can go to at all hours. There's always singing, always worshiping, and so that's why they were there till midnight. And Bose said, quote, "God told Tyler that our group was specially chosen to show the rest of the world what it looked like to live in community, to be really Christian, to be radical." And now we finally get a name for this group that I've just been referring to as the group, because Tyler started calling it the community, and it just kind of stuck. So that's what they were called. Now, during this time, Tyler had kind of a revelation about Bethany. They were spending so much time together, and he just kind of realized that he was attracted to her. And it was at this point that he realized that he believed that homosexuality was a choice, and he could simply just choose to not be gay and be attracted to Bethany, I guess. So one night, he and Bethany were in the prayer room, and he was just kind of watching her, And as he described it, a giant vat of affection washed over him. Now, Bethany, of course, was just over the moon about this. She had liked him for like 4 years at this point, with no reciprocation, and he finally liked her back. She had never given up on her crush on him. It wasn't long before he asked her out and they started dating. But of course, still, he did not let their relationship get in the way of his commitment to God. They'd go on a date every Tuesday between 6 and 9 p.m. and bake bread together on Friday nights. He also made it clear that he didn't want any kind of physical affection from her, and they wouldn't even kiss until their engagement 2.5 years later. Some of the members even said that it seemed staged, which I can see why they thought that, but none of this turned Bethany away. She was still so in love with him. And there was one night where the community's leaders, aka their core members, were meeting and they were having a group discussion. And everyone was going around and sharing their visions of the future. And when it was Bethany's turn, she said, "Sometimes all I want to do is live in a house with you and a baby and maybe some chickens," which I think is adorable, but Tyler did not think so. He called her selfish for saying this and told her to stop elevating her own desires over those of the community. She, of course, apologized. Tyler was starting to gain more and more control over the members of the community, and it was starting to turn into an actual cult.
Their earnest prayer group soon evolved into something much more alarming.
It became a full-blown cult and a very dangerous cult.
Bose says Tyler told members what to wear, when to eat, and even controlled the romantic relationships among their group.
They did as they were told. They didn't make decisions on their own.
Some of the things he was saying were incoherent and borderline insane. But when you're there, it's perfectly normal.
You've been described as a cult leader.
Okay.
True?
I don't think so, no.
Most of the things that the members did were influenced by Tyler or approved by him. He just knew about everything that went on in the group. If the members' parents were starting to get concerned about Tyler's teachings and what was going on in the community, he would encourage them to cut off contact with them, basically. And many of them did cut off their families because of this. So at this time, Tyler had a job as a math tutor, but he gathered up the core members and he told them that God told him to spend all his time devoted to ministry. So he was like, "I need to quit my job and you guys need to support me financially." And Bethany, who was one of the core members, actually was in an accelerated nursing program at this time. Everything in the members' lives revolved around Tyler's end times preachings. They were getting ready for the Great Tribulation, which was when good would battle evil for dominion of their souls. Tyler was even getting ready by stockpiling supplies and training the community for the apocalypse. According to some of the group members who were in the campus group but did not make the move to Kansas City with Tyler, the group members who did make the move were becoming shells of themselves, and once you went to Kansas City, you didn't leave. If Tyler thought the group members were what he considered to be sinning, he would punish them. And one of the punishments was shunning. And now we're going to get a little bit more into Bose Harrington, who was one of the longtime members of the group, but he was also probably the biggest skeptic within the community and challenged Tyler the most, which obviously Tyler did not like. According to Tyler, Bose was guilty of judgmentalism, self-isolation via creativity, and the unwillingness to reform himself. And because of that, he was shunned for 8 months by Tyler and the rest of the group. The only way they communicated with him was through notes under his door. And apparently it got so bad that IHOP got word of it and told him to stop shunning Bose and let him back into the group. Tyler took IHOP's teachings and was operating within the IHOP community, kind of, if you know what I mean. In 2010, Micah returned to the group after graduating college and moved into the men's house in Kansas City. But his mental health had not improved and his parents thought maybe he needed some spiritual guidance, so they sent him to live with Tyler, unknowingly sending him into a whole cult. And Bose said after Micah came back, things got crazy. You see, Micah was still having these kinds of visions, and Bose said he shook all the time and had head convulsions. One night, things got particularly weird when the whole group actually felt this presence of the spirit that Micah was always feeling. They were rolling around on the ground and screaming, and they all came to the conclusion that Bose had a hardened heart because he wasn't joining in. And this resulted in, quote, bizarre punishments and psychological mind games, in the words of Bose himself. Tyler made him eat his food on the floor like a dog, barely allowed him to speak, and sent 3 group members around with him all the time like he was some sort of prison inmate. He also did this thing called behavior modification where he kind of stripped away Bose's identity. They started calling him Bobby. They took away his glasses and they took him shopping to get a whole new wardrobe of khakis and polos.
I wasn't allowed to read or write or do anything particularly creative. Tyler felt that was my escape from other people. He felt like I had repressed a deep-seated animosity towards everyone else in the group, and that it needed to be drawn out and purged away. There was a sense in the group that I wasn't really engaged in the way that I needed to be, that I didn't really want to be there, and that caused problems. It separated me from everyone in the outside world. I didn't have any friends who weren't in the group. I had cut off connection with them, not always intentionally.
And it was at this point, I think, that Tyler realized he could not operate within the constraints of IHOP anymore because they obviously didn't approve of him mistreating Bose. And IHOP was like, we are not a part of this. Like, we don't condone this. And so I think it was at this point that the community became a separate thing altogether. In August of 2012, Bethany and Tyler finally got married.
She was just glowing. Everything that she ever dreamed of had come true for her.
Carol Lideline recalled her daughter Bethany's wedding day in August 2012 as the happiest day of her young life.
My plan was to live the rest of my life with Bethany.
But it wasn't a dream come true like you might think. According to her friends and family, during this time, she seemed like she was becoming more reserved, and some even described her as jumpy and insecure. Their wedding day on August 18th had kind of mixed reviews. According to Tyler, it was a happy, joyous day. But according to Bethany's friends and family, it was weird, uncomfortable, and they felt like they were outsiders looking in on something. And her friend Taryn said, quote, "And I remember thinking she is still beautiful, but it's almost this faded, wilted kind of beauty. Like, this isn't Bethany anymore. It was almost like I felt like I had completely lost her. And now that she was married to Tyler, she was completely gone." And this was the last time her friends and family would ever see Bethany alive. But that is where I'm going to end part 1. Thank you so much for watching. I know it's a cliffhanger. I promise the second video won't be up long after this, and I will tell you the rest of the story. But again, thank you so much for clicking on this video. I really appreciate you watching. Please like and subscribe. It would mean so much since I'm kind of starting from scratch here. Tell your friends. I'm kidding. No, I'm not. I'll see you very soon for part 2. Bye.